with everyone fully. But now, without further ado, I will introduce our panel. First, we have Jessica Banner, who is Assistant Clinical Director and Professional Pastoral Counselor. And she assists with Influencers Leadership School, co-teaching Module 3. Next, we have Rebecca LAMAR, an accomplished executive assistant. She is a woman who would lean heavily upon God and his promises, and we'll hear more about that during the panel. Dr. Stephanie Poole is a pediatrician at Whitlock Pediatrics. We have Vincent Poole, CMHC, a psychotherapist. And we have THERESA VAUGHN, who is a pastor and director of counseling. We also have Mark Westenfelder, a retired finance director, and TERRI Westenfelder, a partner at an attorney. Each of our guests here will be talking to us, as I mentioned, about grief recovery. For more information about each of our speakers, please take a look at the email that I sent earlier if you'd like to read more on their bios. As we go into this discussion, our very own Marlene Maina, co-founder and chair of JosiahKids, will be moderating. So without further ado, here's our panel and moderator.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Sheree. Thank you for all the work you guys have put in to the leadership team. Thank you, Newton. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much, Coach Rondon and your family. Thank you, Dave, back there, for all the work you have put in to make this successful. Our panel today, we're so excited to talk to these amazing leaders. I know some of you a whole lot better than I know some, but for the most part, you guys are going to be really, really blessed to hear from these speakers today. And just so you know, JosiahKids was founded in 2018. Our mission is to educate, empower, and equip young students and teens in the local community in the areas of faith, leadership, community service, and the arts. So we have guest speakers who come and talk to us about different areas, and we're really after empowering our young leaders so that they can cross the finish line of childhood happy, fulfilled, and empowered to make a meaningful life for themselves as well as a meaningful difference. So we're all about equipping them spirit, mind, and body. And I thought that this would be a very valuable topic. And when we scheduled this, it was 2019. We had absolutely no idea what 2020 was going to look like. But as you guys know, wow, how timely, how timely. So thank you for agreeing to be here with us today. I'm very grateful to have each one of you. Just in the interest of time, and because I really want our students to hear what we have planned for them today, I'm just going to jump right in. And we're going to start with you, THERESA. I'd like for you to help our students and our families, all the parents who are here with us today, thank you for making the time to attend these sessions with our students. And we hope that these conversations will carry on at home, help them to process what they're thinking and feeling. And if you have any questions, we're happy to filter those through to our speakers today to be able to get more information to you if you need it. So, Ms. THERESA, would you kindly help our families, our students, including the parents, understand how do you define grief? Because I know when we hear grief, immediately the mind goes to losing a loved one, but I just want you to give the best definition that you can give as a counselor.
Sure. Really, grief is just a word that we use to explain all the emotions we feel when we've lost someone. It means all of the feelings we feel. And grief is unique to everyone. We all will experience it in our lifetime. Many of us have experienced it, a lot of it this year even. And sometimes we don't know what to do with that or how to even explain it. But actually, grief is a way of healing even when we have experienced loss like that. We were made in God's image, and God grieved. God grieved in the Old Testament He inspired a book called Grieving or Lamentations. We see Jesus grieving in the New Testament. He grieved over Jerusalem because the Jews didn't really know who he was or accept him. He grieved with his friends when one of his friends died. And then in the New Testament, we're asked not to grieve the Holy Spirit. So if Father, Son, and Holy Spirit grieve, we're supposed to grieve. Sometimes we think we're not supposed to have all those emotions, but their normal grief is a natural reaction to losing something or someone that's important to us.
That's really good. Thank you so much, THERESA. So Jessica, if you can talk to the uniqueness of grief, because I know sometimes it varies, right? Based on the attachment, how close that person was. And sometimes our grief can come from, losing a job, or as a conversation we've had here that is very near and dear to my heart, some of our kids who've experienced adoption and they feel the loss of, their biological family. What can you tell us about the uniqueness of grief? That, it varies from person to person, or what can you tell us?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is there's no wrong way to grieve, right? Mm-hmm. No two of us are going to experience a grief the same way, even if we have a shared experience, right? We could lose the same thing and be in the same place, and we're not going to experience that the same way, right? And you started today talking about grief is not just the loss of a person. It is absolutely the first thing we think of, because that's one of the more significant losses that we can experience, right? Mm-hmm. And we've definitely, in this last year, we may have experienced that personally in our families, our extended families. We may have experienced that with other people around us and in our community. But even if we look at this last year, there's been all types of losses. And I think that kind of speaks to uniqueness of loss, because we don't always experience every type of loss the same way. I worked with teenagers for a really long time, and actually one of the things that came up a lot was when people would lose hobbies they liked or things that they thought they'd build their career around, even in high school and middle school. If something came up that hindered that was always a big loss, and people had to kind of walk through grieving the identity that they had connected to the thing that they did, right? And we can have loss even if a friend moves away, and you can stay connected. I mean, even this today, that we're getting to do this virtually, we can stay connected, but it's not the same as doing life with people.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's important when we think about uniqueness of loss to recognize that it's okay to grieve and that we don't have to justify, because we have all kinds of losses all over our life, and that, like she said, grief is how we process that loss. And it looks different in different people, right? Some of us cry, most of us should sometime, right? It's a release of emotion. Some people get really angry, that grief comes out in a more aggressive response, or that energy needs to go somewhere. Some of us like to move towards people when we're grieving, and some of us like to move away and have some time alone. So there's all kinds of ways, and there's no wrong way. Each of us has to walk through that, and it might change.
That's good.
How we started the grieving process may not be how we ended the grieving process.
Good to know.
So
Thank you. What a great answer. Wow. So we have heard how grief is defined and the uniqueness of grief. And I think most of us have experienced grief to one degree or another. We have experienced it. And if we haven't, we may experience it. And if we don't, we may know someone who's experiencing it. And I really want us to get the tools and the education on how we can help other people who are journeying through this. And if you don't need it right now, you more than likely will need it in the future. So as we listen today, you may say, well, I haven't been impacted by this, so I may not really need this. But you may have a friend who's going through that right now, or you may have a friend who goes through this in the future. So it's good to have the education and to listen in closely. And one of the things that I really wanted to do when we had this discussion was to talk to people who've walked through this and kind of found the strength to move forward. So our guests Mark and Terry WESTENFELDER, as well as Rebecca LAMAR, they have traveled through this in a very personal way. Grief has touched their lives. And I've known Mark and Terry for many, many years. And I just want them to share a little bit about their story. I've been touched by grief, so I tend to gravitate towards people who are going through loss, just because I remember very well when I lost my mom. I was only 19, and just when I felt like I was healing and getting better, my dad passed away. And I remember in that apartment by myself in Atlanta, just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry and die here alone, and no one's gonna know I'm here. So I know that, I know personally what grief feels like, especially when it's close to your heart. So I want to just give an opportunity first and foremost to hear, Mark, if you don't mind, would you please help our students and our families just to hear a little more about your journey with grief?
Sure, and thanks for having us, Marlene.
Absolutely.
I have to introduce my daughter. It's been 20 years actually this month, and I still cry.
Yes.
You mentioned crying before. I used to say that I used to fill the Pacific Ocean many times with my tears, and every now and again I refill that ocean. So bear with me as I work through this morning. My daughter Alexandria Paige WESTENFELDER. I used to say that was a long name for such a little girl. She was born with a rare genetic disease. Basically, her white blood cells, one of their jobs is to go find infection, attach themselves to the bad virus or bacteria in your body, and eat them up. Well, her cells could find the bad bacteria, but they couldn't attach themselves to eat up the bad bacteria. So she had a life-threatening illness or infection when she was 5. She spent 4 months in Eggleston, a long 4 months in Eggleston. We're very pleased to get her out of Eggleston. We then traveled to Duke University for a bone marrow transplant, because at the time, and still now, it's a very rare disease. At the time, only 75 known cases in the world.
Wow.
So very rare. She had 3 bone marrow transplants. None of them took, unfortunately. And, we lost her. As I said, 20 years ago this month. You mentioned anger. I was angry. I was angry that obviously because I lost my daughter. But I was angry because of the tremendous amount of suffering and pain she went through, physically and emotionally. And I was angry that, as a dad, she did everything she could, and we did everything that we could, and it wasn't good enough.
Right.
And I expressed my anger, probably telling you things you don't even know today, actually. We used to dance. My daughter and I used to dance in the foyer of our house to Britney Spears music. And I used to get in my car, turn on Britney Spears music as loud as I could, or in the house, Britney Spears music as loud as I could, and I'd just scream. I would just scream until I couldn't scream anymore. Then I'd cry.
Yeah.
Another part of my journey was, and this is the most important thing I'll probably say today, is the doctors told us when we left Duke that the most important things that we would do are 2. One is don't make any important decisions in your life for a year. And the second is find professional counseling. It was the first call that I made when we returned to Atlanta. And I have to say that professional counseling benefited me as an individual, benefited my wife as an individual, and benefited our marriage. And some of the statistics that we later learned about is that when couples lose their child, upwards to 80-85% of married couples wind up in divorce. We didn't.
Amen.
So I encourage folks to seek counseling in whatever form it looks like. Spiritual counseling, professional counseling, a neighbor, a friend, somebody that can listen to you and provide, you know, that path forward. And the last thing that was important to me is journaling.
Yeah.
I spent a tremendous amount of time journaling. It was very personal to me. And I agonized over every word. It had to be the perfect word. And I have lots of stuff that I've accumulated over the years. And I still journal to this day, 20 years later.
Wow.
And I go back and I read those journals. And lastly, before I conclude this piece, is making new memories. I reached out to a gentleman that happened to be on the floor with us at Duke. Went out and visited him, and I did that for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
We became very close.
Wow.
We laughed, cried together.
Nice.
We made new memories in wine country out there. we ate a lot of good food and learned a lot of stuff. So that's a brief story for me.
Thank you so much. That's so well shared. TERRI, I know that Jessica and THERESA both said that even when the grief and the loss is shared, the experience is still a little different for everyone. Do you mind sharing just briefly, what did that journey look like for you?
Sure, and thanks, Marlene, for having us here today. It's an honor to speak to your students and to you, and it's an honor to remember our loved ones as well. And as Mark said, we have good days and bad days. I felt great coming up here. Now all of a sudden I'm weepy, so it changes in the moment, so I apologize.
It's okay.
Just a quick background. So while Alex was at Duke, Mark was working at Coke, and Coke was wonderful. They would let him leave on Fridays and come back Mondays and fly up to Durham every weekend, but I was there kind of day in and day out. And we soon recognized, and everybody has their own strengths and their own weaknesses, and we soon recognized that for whatever reason, never being faced with anything like this before, I could compartmentalize. And so I was the one talking to the doctors day in, day out, making those decisions, getting into the science, which probably protected me in those moments from feeling so much. And it helped me get through her illness. But when she passed away, Mark expressed his feelings so outwardly. I was the opposite. I was inward. I was stoic. I wanted to be alone. I would sit up on the couch all night long until I literally passed out to go to sleep, because your mind just goes and goes and goes, and I couldn't bear it. And over time, and it's funny, Mark talked about his journal. I found mine from the hospital and from right after she passed away, to try to remember 20 years ago, kind of what was the time of that process. For everybody, it's different. You can't. There is no right time. But for me, you know, the first month or so, I describe myself as being numb. I did cry, but it was to myself almost. I didn't share much with Mark. And I give him all the credit, because I am not one to, I always joke with him in that he likes to take his guts out, put them on the floor, and mash around in them. I do not like to do that. And so going to counseling to me was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I can handle this on my own. I don't need counseling. Well, he forced the issue. I'm glad he did. He saved our marriage. We recovered, if that's the right word, a lot faster than we otherwise would have, because we came to an understanding of each other. We came to an understanding that there is no right or wrong way, as Rebecca was saying, to grieve. We all grieve differently. There's no judgment, but there had to be a buildup of understanding. And honestly, we couldn't come to that with just the two of us. We had to have a third party that, almost as I describe it, I spoke through, because it was a safe zone, so that he would understand. So it wasn't hurtful to him. It kind of went through like this. And we did couple counseling. We also did individual counseling, which was very helpful. With that, you know, helping us to get to a place where we were, I don't know, 8 or 9 months later, Mark and I looked at each other and we were like, what is our life going to be now?
Yeah.
I said, I love you, but I'm 30-something years old, and we loved being parents, and I have to have that as part of my life. That raised a lot of issues for us because it was the thoughts of replacing our daughter who was lost, but it wasn't anything about that. It was being able to give our love to somebody else. Excuse me. And so through counseling, through us, kind of working together on that, 2 years later, because we didn't want to pass on this genetic issue to children we might have, we went through in vitro. It was hard. It was multiple tries. It was emotional after going through these losses. Those were all new losses every time it didn't work. But at the end of it, we got our beautiful twin boys who are now juniors in high school. And what I will say as part of the grief process is keeping your loved ones alive in everyone's memory, in your hearts, in your stories. They are not gone. We feel like in the moment immediately they're gone, but they're not. And people remind you of that every day. And so we talk to them about her. We tease them. We say, this is what your sister would say about that. She would not have allowed that to happen. Things like that. And then over time, and I know I'm getting long, Marlene, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I talk about it as the scab. The scab covers. And like all scabs, unlike with grief, as I've found, the scab really never goes away. It's always there. But it protects you. It protects your heart so that you can enjoy those memories. You can enjoy new relationships, new experiences. And it also is there so that every now and again it gets knocked off. And that's okay, because it brings back those emotions. It brings back those feelings and those memories even more vibrantly maybe than before. But because you have the scab and it's coming back, you can be in it. It's not going to destroy you. It allows you to experience, and yet still you're still healing. You're still healing and moving on. You never forget, though. You never forget. There's not closure ultimately that people talk about. It's just a process that you learn to adapt to over time.
It's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Wow. We will come back to Mark and Terry later. We have some really good questions to ask them, and I know that story just blesses me when I hear it from this side. Mark's office wasn't too far from mine when I joined the team, and he had that loss. But you both have handled it with so much grace. I'm so, so proud of both of you, just putting one foot in front of the other. And it was an amazing day when we could have a baby shower for them, for the twins. And to think that they're juniors in high school is like unheard of. So Nick and Luke were an amazing blessing. We'll come back to you guys in just a minute, but I wanted to give Rebecca just a few minutes to talk to us a little bit about your story. We'll have more questions for you, but I want our audience and everyone in the room to hear about your journey and your story with Lauren.
Okay.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay, thank you for having me. Lauren was one of those adventurous girls. I have 3 kids, and out of the 3, she was the one that you could say was the daredevil, or the one when you said you can't would say, well, I'm going to do it anyway to prove a point. So May will be 6 years. Lauren decided she wanted to move to Jacksonville, Florida. She stayed there for a while, and then she moved on to Brickell, met some people there, and became friends with this guy, got on a boat Memorial Day weekend, and it was him, Lauren, and another young lady. She didn't know the young lady, but in the course of that day, Lauren was no longer on the boat. The guy thought that she was in the cubby. So when he got back to shore, they cleaned the boat, he and the young lady, and then he told the young lady to go and tell Lauren it was time for them to leave, and Lauren wasn't there. So he said, what do you mean she's not there? Maybe she's playing a joke. No, she's not there. Long story short, Lauren was nowhere to be found. They waited 45 minutes before they found someone to call for search and rescue. So now it's getting dark and they can't find Lauren. Lauren was found two days later, on the side of, almost on the side of the boat, you want to say. So they don't know where she fell off, or we still don't know the whole story, if she was pushed or whatever. But yeah. So had my baby shipped back home so we could have our service, but we couldn't do an open casket. This was in May. Her birthday was in October, so we threw a big birthday party in memory of Lauren. Had a table with all her memories and her books that she liked to read, and all her friends came, and we, you know, because Lauren liked to celebrate. Lauren was life, yes. And she didn't meet a stranger, so you can imagine at her homegoing, the church was packed because, like I say, my baby didn't meet any strangers. So throughout the process, my only prayer to God was that no one would come to me and say, oh, God needed another angel, so he took your baby from you or whatever. No, I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to hear them quoting scriptures because I know the word and I trust that God don't make mistakes. So it wasn't all of the grieving of having people come to me, you know, saying those things. Someone once said, time heals all wounds, and that is not true. I'm sorry. It only allows us to adapt to what has happened. So day to day, as Terry and Mark said, we continue to talk about Lauren. Trust me. I have 2 grandkids that live with me, and God knows they act just like Lauren, especially the 18-year-old. And so we always saying, you're just like your auntie. And we named our billiard room after her, so it's Lauren's billiard because she swears she was a pool shark. Lauren couldn't play pool. So it was a running joke. Every April 1st, Lauren would always pull pranks on somebody in the house every year without failure. So that's a tradition for the boys, that they wait until April 1st to pull a prank on somebody in the house. We're still grieving. We still have our good days and our bad days. Trust me, I still have mine. But I know that God don't make mistakes. And I know all of our days are numbered. So we might think that we're going to live to be 50 or 60 or 100. But when it's time for us to go, it's time. And so her 26 years on this earth, she worked undyingly. She met friends. Lauren traveled. She went to New York when I told her she couldn't go. The next thing I know, girlfriend is in New York at the School of Ballet trying to audition. It's like, you haven't had the training. But in her mind, she thought she could do it, and so she did. Whatever she put her mind to, if she thought she could do it, she was going to do it, whether we said yes or no. So Lauren is still with us. We named our house after her. We, you know, it's, yeah. So we keep her in our memories. And every year we do a balloon release and for her birthday and for the Memorial Day holiday. So we remember her, and we're still fighting the case. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing. I can't believe it's been 6 years. It feels like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It feels like it was yesterday. But we'll come back later to talk more about Lauren and about how you have journeyed through this since that day. But in the meantime, I want to come back to the professional side. And Vince, I know that you are counselor, psychotherapist, and you see a lot of people. And I just want to ask you, what reactions do you see? What reactions do you see from people who are coming in who've experienced grief? What kind of things are normal? What kind of things are sort of not normal? What should they expect, and or what should they be like, okay, this is okay to feel this way? What reactions do you see?
Well, that's kind of a wide range of reactions. And so, there's a lot of stuff that goes into why a person may behave in a certain way during grief. You have to rely on the fact that, what is the history? I like to say psychoanalytical behaviors. What is their age group? So you can look at grief and how the reaction is based on internal responses and external responses. Internal responses basically deals with what is the person's age, what's their maturity like, is there any other diagnoses that may kind of excel or deplenish, that response to grief. So it's a whole lot of different, and I love the fact, the running theme that we're talking about in terms of there's no one way of grief. So I think for a professional and for parents to know your child. And so if you have, say, a 6-year-old and all of a sudden, maybe grandma or granddad has passed away, and then all of a sudden you see behaviors that are regressive, bedwetting, or, behaviors for an older child in behaviors in school that they normally would not have. So it's knowing the child and then being able to know that this is not the norm. Is the first place I would start looking at. So with regards to behaviors with grief, just from a personal standpoint, I kind of understand it because my mom died when I was 16. And then my dad died about a year and a half ago. So I experienced grief at a young age and then as an adult. And it's amazing the similarities, but the differences.
I see.
Because as a 16-year-old, I had not a lot of history to kind of bank off of in terms of, life goes on. And then, but as an adult, not getting into like the amygdala, which, the amygdala is not fully formed. The amygdala makes you very impulsive in terms of your thought process. So at a 16-year-old, your amygdala is not really fully formed until you're like in your mid-20s. And so after that, I was in my 50s when my dad died. So it was a totally different perspective. I had some history to kind of bank off of to know that, what, been here before, and it's tough, but life goes on. So getting back to your question in terms of behaviors, in a 2-year-old, you may see maybe a regression in speech or in that kind of way. When you start banking up between your 2-year-old to 6 years old, again, you may see regression in behavior, bedwetting. When you get into your adolescence, you may see schoolwork fall off or behaviors in school that you normally would disrespect, or isolation is a big one for teens. Teens already isolate. So knowing your child and knowing that, okay, they are normally isolating, what are the other behaviors that they are displaying that is not norm? So it's really during this period of time, having, especially with young kids, just keeping your eye on them and the things that aren't the norm, not taking them for granted and not brushing them off, not treating them like they're adults, because kids process grief totally different than adults do, and getting them necessary help that they need.
That's good.
Even with your younger kids, like I said, at the age of 2, finding somebody who's certified in play therapy that can actually, help them out, but not forsaking that it's going to pass.
Okay.
It's going to be okay. And time, like you're saying, time heals. No, they need assistance, and also getting, as an adult, getting yourself help. Maybe perhaps getting the whole family into family counseling, and allowing them to heal in that kind of way. I always tell people, because I specialize in child and adolescents, fix the child, but if you send them back into the same environment, it's only going to be a Band-Aid. And so allowing the family to heal together is so powerful, especially around anything dealing with death. But like you were saying earlier, I mean, we're talking about death, but the loss of anything can be traumatic, and especially if you don't have a history to kind of undergird the fact that, life, this is a bad time right now, but it will get better if you just hold on. And most young people don't have that. So again, looking for those behaviors and not pushing them aside, and getting the child the help or the family the help that they need.
That's really good. Thank you so much, Vince. That's very helpful. And you know what? One thing you said that doesn't really, I don't think that's ever occurred to me, that you can get a 2-year-old help. I think we just assume they're 2 and they don't understand, or there's really nothing we can do. But that's like a light bulb just went off. Like, wow, I didn't even think of that. But so good to highlight that among all the other points you made. That was really good. So Stephanie, I'm coming to you. And Stephanie, you're a pediatrician. So you see kids all the time, all day, every day. And you're an amazing pediatrician and a great friend. When you see kids on a normal basis, okay, they're there for a physical, it's a health checkup, right? And then you compare that to a child you're seeing who is going through trauma, grief, loss. What do you see that looks different in a child who's going through grief? And I think what I really want to talk for you to touch on, the health of a grieving child. What should we be looking for? What do you see? What are some of the flags, and also what are some of the remedies? What can you tell us about the health of a grieving child?
It's interesting. In pediatrics, one of the things that I really like to focus on is preventative care. And over the course of this last year, it was amazing how God puts things in place. I've been practicing for a lot of years, and it really hasn't been touched upon. We believe in mind, body, and soul.
Yes.
It's all, a lot of people think physical. They think going into a doctor, you're just going to worry about colds, you're going to worry about heart attacks, you're going to worry about all these kind of things. Your mind affects the body. Everything. Your body affects the mind. Right. And your spiritual is all wrapped up in one. Right. And so when you come in with a well visit, they might not have experienced a death or something, so that's not the reason they came in. They came in for their sports form, or they came in for that, or because they need a vaccine so they can go back to school. Okay. We do screenings for 11-year-olds and up in terms of depression, suicide, ideation, and things like that. So things might come up that you weren't coming in there for.
Got it.
Like as you mentioned, loss is not just something that you think of in terms of death. Loss with COVID, they lost their team. Yes. They lost their teacher or their coach. They lost their normalcy in terms of being in the classroom, being around other people. So you might get some of those same symptoms in somebody who doesn't have an obvious loss. And so or somebody coming in for a sick visit for diarrhea, you think automatically stomach virus, or right now we have to think of COVID as well. It could be diarrhea because of a sense of loss.
Wow.
So you have 12 different systems in the body. And the systems that tend to give physical symptoms as much in grief tends to be the immune system, It takes a hit. Cortisol is raging because you get that fight, flight, trying to cope. It brings inflammation in the body. It brings, decreases your immune system. So you can't fight infections. So you might get that stomach virus, but really the cause was because you're grieving. And so if you focus just on getting something to stop the diarrhea, you miss the whole reason why that's happening. It affects the heart system. So you might feel your palpitations, your heart's beating really fast. It's so you feel like your chest, you have pressure. Once again, COVID can give you chest pain.
True.
It might be, you might have a history of asthma. So it could be shortness of breath from that, but it could be the anxiety, the cortisol that's releasing because of stress. It could be your GI tract can go totally off. So you can be constipated, you could be diarrhea, you could have increased appetite, you could have decreased appetite. You can have reflux, inflammatory bowel syndrome symptoms. So it's a lot of different, the nervous system. And you could start being at school, and I've had somebody come in, and all of a sudden now they want a behavioral visit because of focus. They want to think of ADHD. Okay, well, how were you 2 years ago? Oh, they were an A student. They were involved in sports, things like that. ADHD would have kind of surfaced a lot before then. So let's look and see what's been happening in the last year, things like that. Because your focus, your mind just may be in a fog. You're in mush. You just, they call it a mush brain, where you can't think straight. It's not your intellect. It's not because you have a learning disability. It's not because you have ADHD. It's because you're grieving. So there's a lot of different things that you have to think about. And then each age group, as he was mentioning, is going to experience things differently. Your environment and the resilience that you've built up prior to that is going to impact how you handle different stressors in your life. And so the thing that I started with was that in the last year, Strong for Life, which is a resource I'll give you later, had come out to our office, and there's a resilience packet that they've taught us how to give to our parents starting at birth. So that first newborn coming home from the hospital, am I gaining weight, and all those kind of things, we start talking to them then about how you can build resilience in your kids, being proactive, being preventative, so that when they get hit in life, you never know when you're going to get hit with something.
True.
How do they handle it? And it's amazing of how you approach parenting and how even getting that child to sleep through the night. Yes, it gives you your time to be able to get sleep so you can handle them crawling around and getting into things. But also it's teaching them independence that later on, I don't have to be soothed constantly, because there's going to be a time when that person's not going to be there. So it's amazing how God has created our systems. And so if we look at the whole big picture, you won't miss out on the foundation of what's causing the symptoms.
Wow, she has covered a lot of great stuff, like really. So I am going to say that when we come to the doctor, it's important to actually check off all those boxes and truthfully.
Exactly. Don't rush through so you can get to the visit.
Because you're like, man, it's 12 pages. No. I don't want them to start bringing this up. I'll just say no. So you really, again, open my eyes to something that I don't readily think of, that the screenings are there to uncover underlying causes that we may not even think about. And I'm thinking of those parents at home who are like us, who apple cider vinegar for everything, drink some water, go to bed. Oh, I heard that if you do some vitamin C and, so you are saying that, especially if we know there's a lot going on, that it may be helpful to that child to actually go in for some screening and to get the help that they need. I also really, 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 really like the fact that you talked about building that community or whatever you need to do to build resilience like ahead of time, so that when you get hit, and that's something we talk about here at JosiahKids. It's very close to my heart, and I'm really glad you covered that, because many of them know my story. When my mom passed, I just turned 19. We're at her gravesite, and I feel like I'm going blind. Everything is just turning dark. Her casket is being lowered, and just as I look up, I see my dad walking away, frustrated, his hands thrown up, and he left, like, for good. But I remember walking away from that gravesite, just feeling like we were walking into a black hole of a future. We had no idea where we were going. No one was readily saying, hey, you guys can come with. So it's like you're bouncing from one place to another. And it's really the heart of why we started JosiahKids, because I always want kids to have a sense of community, because we didn't have that. We didn't have anyone investing in us, putting those arms around you to say, we're here, we got you. It was almost like, so now what? We're just bouncing around and hoping that somebody somewhere will say, hey, I'll raise my hand up for you. But, you know, that didn't happen. So turning around to say, I want to do that for someone else. So it is really good, and I want those resources, Strong for Life. We can share them with our parents. I'm a parent, I need that, because I always have that at the forefront of my mind. If anything happens to me, what have I done to prepare Joy and Journey to walk through that with a sense of community, so that they're not just strangers in the world alone, right? So thank you so much. You guys are covering such good things. I'm looking at the clock, and I want to move back. Actually, Jessica, can you tell us just a little bit, what do you see in teenagers? You work with teens a lot. Who are you seeing? Who's coming to you? How are they handling grief? What are some of the concerns or things that you can highlight? We have quite a number of teens here. I know. I said really briefly, and then I gave you a big bucket.
Yes.
Sorry.
One of the things I think that's, like they both said, developmentally, even every year, you can see different things with grief. And so even having an early adolescent to an older adolescent, you're going to see differences in that. One of the things we definitely see with adolescents versus like young children or school-age children is the fact that, like Vincent shared with us, you know, they tend to already be isolating it because they're starting to move towards independence, right? We're making our own decisions. We're moving towards our friends, which is developmentally appropriate. But one of the things, we were talking about this morning, is that teenagers like things to stay normal. They want things to be as normal and as status, because their goals are, who am I and how do I fit? And so if something's going on in their life around them, and like we said, it may not just be death, right? Dad could lose his job, we have to move. And even with death, one of the things that teenagers start being aware of is their secondary losses, right? That mom might have passed away, but now we might have financial loss. We might have to move out of our home. So there's all these secondary losses, and where young children may not always have as much awareness of that, teenagers typically have started to. So you might definitely see up spikes in anxiety and depression, isolation, and the anger outbursts, disrespect may be more prevalent, you know, shorter tempers, things like that. But they really still long to not be alone. But we don't want to force them either. We just have to make room and hold space. And I think same thing we've been talking about with prevention, you facilitate that in advance with young kids and with teenagers, creating a space that emotions are okay, they're not our enemy, right? And just that this is a safe place to talk. And one other thing I would say specifically with adolescents is the fact that adolescents can carry adult level conversation, but it doesn't mean they're emotionally equipped to handle adult emotion. And so they can converse, and it benefits for families to have conversation if we have shared grief, but for adults not to impart their grief as the teenager's responsibility, and to still seek help and make space for them to be a kid in what they're experiencing.
Thank you. That's really good. That's really good. TERRESA, on a formal level, I have heard of the stages of grief. And I don't want to even try to say what I know, because I know it's probably wrong. What are those stages of grief? I know that it's probably not going to be the same for everyone, but what can you say are those stages of grief? And I know we already talked about why it's important to grieve, but what would you say are the normal stages of grief?
Sure. Many of the parents out here have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's the most famous person that's really identified stages of grief. She was a psychiatrist that, just working with families of terminally ill patients, found these to be the stages that most people will go through The thing to remember about the stages of grief, and as I share them, is they're not linear. They don't. That means that they won't be. You won't experience this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, and just walk your way through it all. It's all done. You're going to go in and out of each of these stages for a period of time. The first stage, of course, is shock and denial. And denial is just really the brain trying to, this can't have happened. This isn't real. Waking up the next morning and feeling like the person is still there. Just our brain actually does that to try to protect us, because if we felt all of the fullness of what has just happened all at one time, it would be so overwhelming we couldn't handle it. So our brain, God designed us with some resilience, and these stages are some of the ways he's done that. So the first thing is that denial. It's disbelief. It is a state of shock. Sometimes it even feels a bit paralyzing. It's a kind of an intense, paralyzing state. After denial, as the reality kind of sets in, this has really happened, comes anger. And it's normal to feel angry. As you're saying, sometimes we express it sometimes very outwardly. Sometimes we express it's inside. Anger often it's also directed, sometimes toward others, sometimes toward the person we lost, sometimes toward God, and sometimes toward ourselves. All of those are normal, and we go in and out of those. After the anger kind of begins to subside and we just are really faced with, this has really happened, our brain goes into another state of trying to not believe it's happened or believe something could change it, and that's the stage of bargaining, where our brain says, if I could just do this, I can make him come back. I can make this not have happened. And so there's a period of time that we're working through that. We blame others for the cause of grief. We ask, why me? That's not fair, and so on in this stage. But after bargaining comes something, and I literally, when we describe grief on a scale, we actually say depression. We've gone into a pit. The fullness of this has happened. I can't change it. Nothing I do is going to make them come back. And this just hurts real bad. It feels bad. And there's no definite time frame for that, but if it goes for a while, and we're talking I think you have a little bit later about kind of how long that may last. It lasts different times for different people. We may go, depression just hurts so bad, we go back into anger. This is just too much. Depression might hurt so bad, I'm just going to go back into denial for a little while. I don't want to really think of this happening. But eventually, we do come out of that depression and go up toward what we call acceptance. Acceptance is not saying this was okay. Acceptance is saying this has happened, it hurts, they're not going to come back. This is not going to change. If it's not death and other kinds of losses, I'm not going to go back to where it was before. But I am going to see that there may be life after this. And I can begin to accept the reality of what's happened and and hope starts building in acceptance.
That's really, really good. And a good segue into my next question, because I'm coming back to Rebecca, Mark, and TERRI, and I want you guys to kind of walk us through. I love stories because that's what helps me. I get past, when I hear what people have gone through, it's so easy for me to hear what you have to say, because it's like, okay, so then you kind of get me. So I want to just touch on a few things that I feel like in your stories and your journeys would help our audience just as much as they've helped me, just knowing what you guys have traveled through. So, Ms. THERESA just talked about acceptance, and I'm not going to have you guys answer each of these. I'll just give you a different question each because of the time, and I want to leave some time for Q&A, so I'm going to move through them quickly. Mark, adjusting to life without Alex. How are you going back to work? What did that look like for you?
Yes, it's difficult, isn't it? For me, it was work, Marlene. It was a place that wasn't home. My friends, my colleagues were there. It was an enormous distraction that I had, right?
Yeah.
Because as Terry mentioned, nights are the worst, aren't they? And so for me, it was work. That was my refuge. Yeah.
That helped. Wow, that's so good to know. That's so good to know. Terry, this is a hard question because I know how difficult this was for me, but I'm going to ask you. So what did you decide to do with her belongings? How soon? How did you say, okay, I've accepted this. I need to do something with her room, her clothes. What did you do? How did you do it? When did you do it?
I was thinking about this yesterday because this was 20 years ago, and a lot of things are, some things are fuzzy. But I'll digress just a little bit.
Please.
You know, one of the things that people told us after she passed away was, don't create a shrine, don't do that. And I'm like, we're not creating a shrine, but this is where she lived, and this was her room, and this was her stuff. And we weren't mourning in her room every day, but it was part of our home.
Yes.
And so we were in no rush to, as some people wanted us to do, family members included, kind of move on, move on, move on. So we took our time. I would say probably the first thing we did, well, and let me just start with at Duke, because we were away, we had bins and bins of stuff because we were there 8 months.
Wow.
So toys and clothes and everything. And what we did with those things is we kind of just left them in the bins and just put them in the attic. That was fine. But they're in the attic.
Yes.
Her room, we left as it was for probably, Mark, you may remember, a couple of years.
Wow.
And it was treated as a room. If we had guests over, that was the guest room. We always called it Alex's room because that was her room, but that was the guest room. And then after a couple of years, we took the wallpaper down. We packed up things that had been in the drawers that we'd forgotten about, that we just had not gone through. And then, you know, for me, what I want, I still have not done this. It's 20 years later, but I have everything saved to do it, is Mark and I wanted to have a quilt made of like her favorite dresses. She was a girly girl and loved her dresses. And so we were just going to have a quilt made of her dresses, which I still want to do. I just haven't done that yet. So we took our time. There was no like deadline or anything like that. And I think what we came to appreciate, because when someone you love, you lose someone, you're holding on to everything at first, because that's all you have. You don't have the person, you just have the stuff. And then as time goes on in your healing, you can let the stuff go. It's just stuff, because the memories and the person who they were, that's always with you. And your brain, you get that. At some point, everybody, it's different, you get that. And so, anyway. Is there anything I forgot? Yeah.
That's very, very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. You? Okay. Is that better, David? Okay. Thank you. All right. Yes, I can hear it too. Okay. So, Rebecca, you already told us one of the things you just did not want anyone to walk up to you and say. I do know about that. Now, tell us, do you have any more of those kind of things that people said that you found to be unhelpful? Like things that they say thinking they were being helpful, but turned out not to be so helpful, and you wish they didn't say those things?
Yeah. I would have someone say, well, you know, just get over it. Or,
wow,
you know, she's gone. You can't bring her back. You know, and it's those kind of things that people don't understand. Words hurt. And so I was telling, I'm on we have a ministry at our church for comforters. And I always tell our comforters, sometimes you don't have to say anything. Just your presence, to be in the room with that person that has grieved or that's grieving. If you're just there for them, not trying to talk to them, or just give them a hug, or just, for you to just be in the room. And so many times we think that we always have to have the right thing to say, or we have to say something. And my mom always used to say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So, and that's the way I feel. So if you can't come to me and say, hey, I remember the time that Lauren did A, B, and C, or she said something and it stuck with me, or she told a joke and I laughed, or they tell that dry joke that Lauren told that she thought was funny, that helped. But when you come to me and, try to say, well, God wanted another angel. No. God got enough angels in heaven. So, I can't understand why you're trying to talk for God. But yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you for that. Mark, I remember coming to you when Lauren passed away, and you were very helpful. You may not even remember this, because we were trying to figure out what to do to honor her. And I remember you telling me something that was so important, it stuck with me. Because we raised money, so many people sent money, and I was just collecting all this stuff, getting ready to take it to Rebecca's house. And I asked you, I said, Mark, what would be the most helpful thing? What is so helpful? I don't know if you remember what you told me, but if you do, I want you to say it, because
I think I do. I think that, and keep me honest here if I'm not going where you wish for me to go, but most folks are focused on a single event, right? A gift, a remembrance. And I suggested that we remember Lauren not once, but in subsequent years on the anniversary. And I can only speak for myself, but at least my biggest fear as a parent is my baby will be forgotten, right? So I didn't want your baby to be forgotten. It was a one-time thing. No, we're remembering, year after year after year. Is that?
That is
I remember
absolutely
that,
correct,
Yeah.
and it's etched in my mind. And that answer actually drove what we did, because then we gave a gift. We were there at the funeral, but I held some of that money. And then at the 1-year anniversary, I remember sending, hey, you don't have to cook today. This is on us. Here's a meal. I also remember we came over to your house, and the team planted a tree and a rose bush, you remember. And of course, we gave it Lauren's name.
We named the
Go ahead.
rose bush Janae, because that's her middle name. And we named the tree Lauren.
Yes.
And it's still in the yard. And so when we moved, my son wanted to know if we needed to uproot it. We're not selling that house. So I told him she will stay there until we figure out how we can move both pieces without killing it.
Yes.
So right now, Lauren is still in Decatur, but she's also in Fayetteville.
Yes. So,
I told you she'd get around.
right. But I bring that up because, again, the ways that we can borrow from our learnings and share these stories and what helps. I came to you because I knew you had walked through this. You gave such good advice, and I never forgot it, and we were able to apply it. And I know we're coming to this because I want to leave some time for Q&A, but it helped me a lot with her and anybody else who has gone through the losses to put that on my calendar, because then, you remember. And even if it's a text or whatever it is, just to say it. So can we say that mentioning your loved one is helpful. Talking about them, is that helpful or not helpful? Because some people don't say anything because they're afraid when you've lost someone. Is it helpful, Terry, to hear about Alex? Is it not helpful?
I would say that's about the biggest gift you can give.
Wow. Please say that again.
It is the biggest gift you can give someone that's lost someone, is to talk about them constantly and not be afraid. I get such joy, and people still today share stories of Alex with me, and it's been 20 years ago, and I had a good friend yesterday call me who was on my Instagram page, and I guess last year I had posted the anniversary of Alex's death, and my friend called me to tell me her teen daughter, who used to babysit Alex, was on the page, and they wanted to share with me, you know, their memories of her and how much, you know, that she meant to them. That is the world.
That's awesome.
That's the world.
That's so good to hear. Mark.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you've had this experience, Rebecca, is when folks share their, admittedly our daughter was only 5, but she lived a lot of life in those 5 years. We learn about her life that wasn't in our presence. It's like, wow, she did that, or I can't believe she did that.
Wow.
You know, so that's always kind of, so we learned about, our daughter beyond just our personal experiences.
By what other people shared. That's so good to hear. I love that. Love that. All right. So I really have a lot that I wanted to ask, but I feel like we need to move on to Q&A. But before we do, there are 2 things I feel like we really must cover before we go to Q&A. And I'm eyeing those 4 on that side. When grief becomes complicated, when you start to see, I'm not getting out of bed, I'm not taking a shower, I'm not eating, I'm not socializing, I've lost interest in everything and everybody, and I'm stuck. What would you say about that? What advice would you give if a loved one, it could be your parent, it could be your child, it could be your relative, this is happening, grief has become complicated really quickly, what would you guys say? What do they need to do? THERESA, I'll call you out.
First of all, recognizing all those things you just said, if they're just happening or they've just happened for a little while, don't get upset. Don't get worried about that. Okay. Those are normal responses to grief for a while. Okay. When they've been going on for a period of time, and no one can say what that time is, but I would say if you're seeing those kinds of reactions for months, then you're looking at complicated grief. You're looking at someone who's really not able to move through those stages and so on, and likely needs some kind of professional or professional spiritual help, someone to help them, just identify them, to help point that out. How can we help you? They need to talk about it. Some of the things one of the things those happen for is because the person is not talking about it.
Okay.
Perhaps they've had a lot of people coming in and saying some of the things y'all talked about. And so that actually stops a person from sharing their experiences. They're likely to share their own struggles if they're not feeling spiritual enough about this, or they're not able to respond the way they've been told they're supposed to, then they're not going to share with anybody. So there's more isolation and so on. So talking about it is really a major step, helping them. If that is probably the biggest thing that'll help them move through grief. Just like y'all were saying, talking about the person, talking about letting them know that you're not going to get over it. This is getting through, and that process is a lifetime.
Okay, love it.
And that's okay.
And something else I would say, because you said something earlier that really stuck out to me, because I agreed with it, is that you really have to evaluate. You know, for those of you that are kids, you know yourself. For those of you that are parents, you know your child, and you may know your friends if this is somebody going through this. But one of the things that tends to be a part of complicated grief is if there were things that existed before a loss, especially a death. We talk about this all the time, being trauma therapists, that there can be things that have happened in our life or things that happened in relationships that when someone goes, especially unexpectedly, that there were things that weren't resolved. And that part of, especially for kids, because we already have a tendency to blame ourselves, right? And we see that particularly in children and teenagers, that guilt may be one of the feelings we're feeling around death, and that can be one of the factors that's complicating that. And so something to be aware of is, let's talk that out. Especially for you parents participating in that, being aware of, is there more to the story happening here? And are there things that were unresolved? Because we really can't fix it. Like she said, we've got to move through it, which is why those things aren't helpful to hear, right? And I'll add this just as a note, because we live in a culture that doesn't make room for us to grieve. And I mean, we get 3 days off work, 3 days bereavement, and you haven't even registered.
Right.
A lot of families haven't even made funeral plans by then. And so we can make room for each other. You can make room for your friends. Like you said, showing up and sitting is one of the best gifts you can give anybody, and sharing your stories. That's good. Right? So I think that's a part of moving through that grief too, and that it doesn't have to just be the first 2 weeks of that loss.
That's good.
The first year, you could show up on the anniversary or be aware that week. Like I might need to have lunch with that person that week, or, for a few months, and, staying on top of that.
That's really good, Jessica. Thank you. Vince.
And just to add to that, also, if it's extended beyond, like you're saying, a 6 month, I hate to put a time frame on, because, and I'm so glad the ICD-10 and the DSM-5 have kind of taken back that time restriction. But I would say also that to get help, to make sure you get in to see someone, because you can be dealing with some comorbidities, more than one diagnosis. We know that grief, the way you may treat grief is different than you may treat trauma or depression. But if you have all three going on at the same time, you need some help. You need professional help. And so if you see this cycle that you're constantly cycling through, and it's been that long extended time, then perhaps I would say yes, we need to get some help. And then looking at the grief cycles, dealing with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Like you were saying earlier, you cycle through those. And so, like for myself, if you catch me on, my mom died, over 30-something years ago, catch me on the right day. And depend on, so somebody may look at me and say, oh, wow, that's been a while, and you're still grieving over that?
Right.
And so you cannot put that kind of restraint on it. But, through healthy counseling, then you learn how to manage, and like you said, how to, when those times come up, how to walk through it, and walk through it responsibly, and then go on from there. But definitely seeking professional help.
That's really good. Stephanie?
I would say that give yourself that space, because you want to jump right back in. The kids have to get back to school. They get a day to be off and things like that. And then you're wondering, why are their grades falling and things like that. And so, or a child's tantruming more. So you're already stressed. So you're going to just like, why are you doing that? You're going to yell at them. And that's, instead of realizing that might be them not able to say the words, but them expressing grief.
Processing.
So kind of giving each other grace that says, okay, my child's gone through a lot too. So instead of just disciplining and things like that, trying to open that line of communication so that they feel comfortable being able to talk and getting help. I mean, it's hard enough for professionals to sit there and to tease out what everything's going on, but for parents, when you're going through, or for kids to realize what's going on. Why am I not able to participate in, or why I feel this way? Why don't I want to be around my friends? But the main thing is listen to them, open that line of communication. If a child says they would hurt themselves, believe them. Don't, or if you're sitting there when you're having stress, like I said, it's fight or flight. You can be, for adults especially, at high risk for heart attacks. Get help.
Okay.
If you have symptoms, don't assume, oh, it's just this.
Okay.
Find out. Your thyroid can get off for adults and things like that.
Gotcha.
So get help sooner than later.
Okay.
And just open that line of communication for everybody.
Wow, that's very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Can I just add that one of the things that complicates grief is that belief that we're supposed to get over it. We're supposed to get through it in a certain time. This 3 days for work and so on, that time frame. So one of the things we have to remember is God's even talked about this, and he said it's impossible when we've lost someone or anything to not hope that didn't happen and so on. And God said hope deferred makes our heart sick.
Yeah.
And heart sickness is going to take a while to get better, to even get a little better.
That's really good. That's really good. So I'm really grateful. You guys have done an amazing job. I feel like we could go for another hour because I have so much, and you are covering such good content. But I want to turn our attention to our families. I do have some questions to ask myself, but I wanted to just first see, did we get any questions on the chat? If so, we could read them. If not, do you guys have any questions? Students, parents, any questions for our panelists?
If I may.
Yes.
No one has spoken up yet. I just want to say first, thank you guys so much for sharing what you did, your experience, your strength and your hope. It is inspiring. I had a question about a specific kind of grief, and we don't always think of it in this way. I was a child who was a product of foster care, and I know, I'm sure you all know people who have experienced foster care, and then you think about people who have been, adopted. There is a grief that's not always spoken about when you are separated from your family, and whether that separation through death or actual physical separation, that grief and how that can be handled and should be handled, I feel, and I am biased given my experience, I feel it's not spoken out enough about. And so I wanted to know what guidance, what you could share with us about how to deal with that grief as children and as an adult. How does one heal or go through those stages that one needs to become a healthy and whole person?
Good one, Sheree. Thank you. A very good question. And when you guys answer, I really want to hear you include, when you say get help, seek help, find help, what does that look like, or what does that mean? Where do we go? Who should we be calling? Should we be on Google? Where should we go? So her question, and then just see if you can include some of that, please.
Well, one of the things that, one of the theories I would say that I kind of lean towards is, and it kind of suits your case, is attachment disorder. Sometimes, when we are detached at an early age, we form bonds, right, with our caregivers. And a lot of times, if that's hindered in any kind of way, we can form unhealthy attachments, if that makes any sense. And so if that attachment, God has placed, it's amazing how God has orchestrated parenthood and guardianship over young people. And so when there's a glitch in that, a lot of times down the line, that's why I was saying earlier, I like psychoanalytical. I always look at someone's history. What is your history? Because a lot of behaviors that we see as in adults stem back to, that attachment or bad attachment that we have as a child. So, I mean, to make a long story short, yes, that's an area that needs to be addressed a lot of times, even if you're not even having problems. A lot of it can be the undercurrent and can surface later. So I would say, someone who has gone through the system, foster care system, And especially if you've been from home to home to home to home and never had that bonding, you know, relationship, then again, I gotta reach back to, you know, those are things that a therapist or counseling, a psychologist, psychiatrist can help you kind of fend through. And like Stephanie was saying, it's amazing. A lot of times you may see behaviors as an adult and have no idea that it's stemming all the way back to the fact that I missed out on X, Y, Z. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does, and thank you so much. That's a great answer. If I were to say adopt a child or had a foster child, what is it good to just have them in there? Just even if
Take
there are
them
no
anyway,
things,
yeah.
there's nothing going on. It's best to have them involved with the therapist or.
So I'm going to add an extra spin to this because I actually talk to people about this a fair amount. I worked with several people when I worked in the hospital, kids who were in the foster care or adopted. And, you know, I would work with kids who were like, I have a great place. You know, I've got people who love me. They took me in, but I still can't shake this feeling, right? I still can't shake this longing. I still can't shake this even feeling of betrayal, you know. And I think when you're in that position, and I'm going to take it a little theological here because I believe that God created our families as an image of Him. And so our parents represent a picture of God. And so when there's been any kind of separation from that initial attachment or connection, even if what's beyond that is great, we still have questions. We still have feelings about what that means. And I think when you're taking care of kids in that situation, it's making room for that. I don't just say throw kids into counseling for counseling's sake, but let it be a part of conversations in the home. Make room to say, you know, hey, we love each other. It's great here. And it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes it's hard. You know, kids are testing for safety because it didn't always feel safe. Like he was saying, you know, if I've been in home after home after home, I don't know if I can trust adults. There's not really been an adult I can trust. And so I think it's a gift of patience. I think God really anoints people who say, I want to make you my family. But part of that journey is helping a child journey through their own experience in that and making room for the betrayal, making room for the grief and the anger and all of those things. And we do that certainly with additional resources, right? Counselors, you know, sometimes churches have resources. Like we're a counseling department inside of a church. You can reach through your insurance company, Psychology Today. There's some other search engines that you can plug in your insurance and things like that that help you kind of know where to connect. Even because we're dealing with grief, I would say with grief, I go ahead and say it doesn't hurt to plug kids in immediately to grief groups. There's a lot of grief groups out there designed for kids to help them walk through the initial stages. I don't know any off the top of my head, but there's one I know to ask about that I can get to you later.
Send it to us.
But those, like Grief Share is just a process to help people through that first 6 months of grief, like what to expect. Because a lot of people don't know, and different types of grief don't always go the same way. So I just say make room for it and the patience and that emotions are okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
That's good. That's good. Do we have any questions? Do you see anyone raising a hand? Parents, kids, any questions? Nathaniel, yes. Nathaniel, we're really sorry for the loss of your grandfather and your uncle. Really sorry. And I know quite a number of you have lost grandparents lately, and we're sorry about that. Any questions from our audience? Robert, I think you are muted. Hang on, let's see. Hold on one second. Okay, let's try again, Robert.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. For me, it was just thank you. I do appreciate everyone, and my experience was just being around people who grieve, and I wish I'd had a talk like this before, just because in my life that wasn't shared and wasn't talked about. So, and the comment that I wanted to make was just hearing this at this point, it's so useful because my former life I didn't react the right way. I think it was a new experience and I wanted things to be okay for people around me. So the way I did was to try to downplay it or try to get wanting them to be okay, not recognizing that they're going to grieve. It's almost like just trying to do something and say something so that they can feel okay and they can be okay, but it wasn't recognizing how they're grieving and what they're going through. So hearing this and hearing the different perspective, it's a learning tool for me. And something that really has stuck with me, and hopefully moving forward, it's something that I'll have learned more from what you shared today. So thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else? If we don't have any, I have a question. It's 12:02. So when do you recommend, because some of the losses are very difficult to talk about, to even process. When it's traumatic, when it's suicide, when, you know, that kind of thing happens. I know that sometimes they recommend group counseling, sometimes they recommend only individualized. When would you recommend either one? But also, what would you tell someone? Because I remember my husband and I got a call a few months ago, and a friend of ours said, hey, I'm talking to someone here and they are talking about suicide. What do I do? What do I do? Can you? And we were both scrambling because we didn't have an immediate, you know, hey, call this number or call or do this. What would you guys say? What would you guys say to that? I asked 3 questions, I think. You caught that, right?
First of all, as Stephanie said, if someone is talking about hurting themselves and taking their life, take it seriously.
Okay.
Immediately. Do not consider that they might just be looking for attention and so on. You want to take it seriously, give them some help. You certainly can call 911. You certainly can take them to an ER. You can get them to a counselor. I would say one of the things about when someone is going through something like that, instead of saying you need to go or you need to call, let me go with you. Let me help you call. I'll go in for the first visit. Most counselors welcome someone coming in with the person for the first time or whatever. And so it's important to come alongside when someone is going through something like that. Counseling, and going back even to the question earlier about foster care and so on, anytime someone's in foster care, adoption has happened or whatever, there has been a loss. That the fact is, loss has occurred for that situation to be going on. Anytime loss has happened, we need to process and grieve that loss. The only thing we can actually do about loss is grieve it. We can't change it, can't make it not have happened. So helping someone understand we need to do that. And looking for counseling, looking for someone who specializes in trauma and loss counseling and care. Individual versus group, there's advantages to both. I see great advantage in group counseling because group counseling offers 2 things, particularly if it is guided by a facilitator who is experienced and familiar, because not only do the person who's coming in get help themselves, but in that state of brokenness and hurt and so on, they actually get to be an instrument of healing for others. And that is very important, because when we're hurt, we feel like we don't have anything to offer, and group counseling offers an opportunity to do that.
I would especially say that for child and adolescent. There's certainly times to work individually, and play therapy, you're going to find that be a little bit more individualized. So with younger kids involved in that, you'll probably see that be individual. But like I said before, with kids want things to stay normal, and one of the ways that they're looking to do that, kids and adolescents have less experience, like you shared in your own, right? Like being 16, I didn't have as much experience with that to know that I can get through this to the other side. But the group environment helps them feel less isolated sometimes, like, oh, there's other kids going through this. Because a lot of times just in the neighborhood or at school, that's harder to identify. You don't wear that as a badge of honor. There's no indicator. We work with somebody who said it'd be great if you just had like an arm cuff or something you wore that said, I'm grieving right now. But we don't do that. And so having that social environment with a facilitator that's productively moving the group through that. But there are definitely times, if it's complicated and stuff like that, you may move towards individual counseling.
I just wanted to give you one resource, and I'll give you some of the information before, but there is one, it's a national suicide prevention line.
Okay.
So if they're in the midst right that minute, you don't want to go to the ER, you don't want to call 911, you don't have anybody there. It's 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K.
Okay.
Or if you rather text, you can text the word TALK, T-A-L-K, to 741-741.
Okay.
So I'll give you those resources. So
Thank
that's
you.
something that
We
they
can
have
share it
immediately,
with
because
the
almost all
families.
kids have phones now.
Okay.
So even if it's something that sometimes friends will go to friends. So you have a teenager, or you have a child that they're confiding their friend, and they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So, and that would give them direct resources right that minute, either way.
We'll share these resources with each one of you. I think we are, yes, Lorraine, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. There's two questions. I'll just ask the one and Sheree will ask the other. Just along the suicide lines, I was recently surprised, actually. I was listening to, I think it was PBS, and they were talking about suicide, and they were saying that it's better to talk about it when you know people who are going through it. That was the first time I've ever heard that. And I wondered if you could comment on that. Because normally, I don't know if you asked, I couldn't hear you very well. I don't know. It's okay. But that I wanted to know, when you know someone who's going through this, is it something you want to talk about? Or is it something you did say, because most people try to avoid it. And it was the first time I heard that it was healthier to talk about it rather than to just, that if I talk about it, you're going to think about it more type of thing.
So I would say a couple things, especially because you do see this some in elementary school, but you certainly see it more in middle and high school. Talking about it always helps. I tell people depression hides because it likes to stay sick, right? And so bringing things out of hiding is what helps things heal. Now, what I will say, and this is the second piece of that, is that, like Stephanie just said, kids will go to kids, right? And some of you may be on this, and you may have had somebody tell you that they're feeling that way, and that can feel kind of scary, honestly. Even being 15, 16, I'll tell you, adults get scared to hear that. That's a scary thing to hear, that somebody's in so much pain they don't want to be here anymore. And the one thing I used to tell, working with hundreds of adolescents, was it's okay to seek an adult. Because, and being the person hearing that, you might need to talk about it. What does it feel like to hear that? Because there's at least a loss of a sense of safety and control. That's a loss for us when we even hear those types of things. So adolescents don't always have access, you as teenagers don't always have access to the resources that adults can help get for that child. So I know a lot of times kids will say, don't tell anybody, but I just want you to know. And that's not a fair place for you to be as a friend. And so, and that person probably didn't mean to put you there on purpose, but because they're hurting, they didn't see the bigger picture. And so it's not necessarily fair for you to have to sit there in secrecy. So I would say it's okay to ask for help. Ask mom and dad, go to the school counselor, talk to a teacher, somebody who can help initiate that person getting the help that they need.
Something else she's saying. So if, and Lorraine, correct me if I'm wrong, if, for example, talking about your daughter, talking about Lauren, and there's so many ways we can honor our loved ones. I know you've honored Lauren's memory by supporting JosiahKids. She's one of our monthly givers at JosiahKids, and she gives in honor of Lauren. And it's a gift that we receive, like almost you don't want to even take it because it's so sacred, but it is helping to empower. It is helping to equip and to give the tools to other kids. So I appreciate that. Now, it helps when you hear your loved ones talked about. Would it equally help if the person lost that child to suicide, for example? Or would it be more damaging? Because most people, I know what you just said about, because there's shame and there's a stigma attached to it, and it's harder for most people to talk about it and even to admit that, hey, our loved one, you know, you feel like you are to blame. So sometimes people just don't talk about it at all. So I want to echo what she's asking, because what I heard her asking is, do you think it's helpful to actually bring that up if those were the circumstances that they lost their loved ones? Like, or is it one of those Rebecca moments, if you have nothing good to say, don't say it at all?
Coming alongside, being available so that the person can talk as they want to.
Okay.
As Rebecca said, the ministry of presence,
Yes.
just being there opens the door for people to talk to you. A great question is, what are you feeling right now?
Okay.
Not how are you feeling, but what are you feeling
Okay.
right now?
Okay.
Give me a chance to feel, and they may share some of those feelings and thoughts with you, but being available for them to share,
Okay.
and not being afraid or shocked or judgmental
Okay.
about anything you hear.
Okay.
That's as other thing I want to say is, for kids, we talked about counseling. Many times parents whose the family's gone through something put their kids in counseling, but my kid needs that help, and parents think, well, I've got this under control. It's very, very, very important for the parents to go and to get counseling themselves,
Gotcha.
because as they are healing, they're going to be better able to help their kids.
I see. Love it.
I'll add a little something to that too. It kind of takes me back to what you were sharing a little bit ago about people want to hear about their loved ones. And I think what happens a lot with suicide is that people get so scared to talk that they don't talk at all. And I think, like she was saying, I don't think we have to insinuate about the suicide. I think what you do is you share the memories.
I see.
You make room, you open the dialogue,
Okay.
because in the building that, you're building a safe place for, as you're talking, if they need to process the suicide, you've become a safe place to do that.
Gotcha.
But you haven't made the purpose of their life about how they died.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Because it isn't really for anybody, whether even if it's a drug overdose or, things like that. There may be things that led to that, but nobody wants the person they love to be remembered for their things that were a product of their pain.
Gotcha.
They want their person to be remembered about what was so special about them, unique about them. And so I think when you lean into sharing, like Terry shared, I think you make room for becoming a safe place if they need to process how a person died.
Okay.
And I think also, just to add, that was perfect. I think one of the other things is to not being presumptuous
Okay.
and asking the question, how can I be there for you? And allowing that person the space and empowering that person with it. And they may not even know, but they say, like you were saying, just be here. And so just asking the questions and not putting yourself in as the all be all, but letting them know how you can be there for them is important.
Thank you guys so much. We have one last question. It's from one of our students. His name's Eli, and he's one of our younger students. And Eli has the question, How does grief end? How, yeah. Yes, and that's open, obviously, to everyone on the panel.
Wow.
Grief never ends. As we said earlier, you just learn to adapt to the situation, and you continue to remember that person or that thing and get through it. But it never ends. I mean, Lauren is 26. Alexandria was 5. And for 20 years, we're still remembering what happened, and we're still remembering her life. So it never ends. You just learn how to adapt to it, and you remember the good times. You remember all of the times that if it was your grandma, whenever you went over to her house and she baked your favorite cake, or you remember the times even when she spanked you for something that you did. And then every once in a while, there might be a song or something that will bring back a remembrance of, when I was at this situation, I remember the conversation because the song brought it back. So grief never ends.
Thank you for that. And speaking of it never ends and good memories that we focus on, I did not forget talking to Mark when I had daughters and they started asking me if they could polish their nails. And I was like, you know what? Yes, you can polish your nails. And to be very honest, the reason why I was so willing to let them polish their nails is because your daughter used to polish your toenails, Mark. Am I right? And you would let her, right? I know, but I thought it was I thought it was beautiful because I said to myself, I mean, what does it hurt? When I heard those stories and we would laugh, you know, tears, but you're laughing and saying, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. And that you would agree to it and she would do it. And I said, I want my kids to experience, I mean, it's just polish, you can take it off, you know, because we grew up where my dad said, I mean, you better not even think about polishing anything in this house. Like, but it let me. And I said, I want to give them as many good, sweet memories just based on that story. So it is good for us to honor our loved ones with these type of memories. I really, really appreciate you guys being willing to share your stories, to be here, because I don't think, have you guys spoken about this in public ever?
Not in this type of form.
Okay, yeah. I appreciate that you were willing to do that. I appreciate that you were willing to do that because, you know, sometimes it's so raw. I couldn't tap. There are people who I was just like, I can't even, because I know it's still so raw, hard to talk through. But thank you, Vince and Stephanie. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Miss Theresa. You guys, with COVID-19 and the losses we've had in the nation, you're seeing how many people a week? 30 plus a week. It's a lot of people. So people do need help. And you making the time and just kind of putting that on hold to come speak to our students, so much appreciated. Thank you. I think you guys did a wonderful job. It was better than I even could have asked for. Thank you for being here. Thank you, students. Thank you, parents. Thank you, team, for creating a safe place for us to talk about this. Thank you, Dave, for giving up your Saturday to help us with the graphics. Thank you, Newton, who was here till 1 in the morning setting this up. You're amazing. Thank you, Joy and Johnny. And with that, Ms. Sheree, I'll hand it back to you to close.
All right, thank you so much, Miss Marlene, and thank you again to all of our students. You guys are amazing. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We want to thank our panel. We are so grateful for you taking the time to speak to us, to fill us with so much knowledge, to help us laugh and even cry. Thank you so, so very much. So I echo the thanks that Marlene has already given. From us to you, Josiah Kids, we say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
All righty, we're going to close out, students. We're going to close out. We need someone to close us out in prayer. So if I can get one student to do that for us, we will end our session. Miss Lorraine, do we have a candidate?
Yeah.
Javon Kassoon, thank you so much. Javon, if you'll be sure to come off of mute and lead us in our closing prayer. Thank you. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Javon. We appreciate it. Guys, go have a wonderful, wonderful Saturday. We hope that you have an amazing, amazing weekend. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. You do not want to miss our next session. We have a special guest coming to speak to us all about their journeys, a young woman who was Times Person of the Year. So don't miss it. Tune in. All right. All right. Have a good one, Josiah Kids. Bye-bye, everyone.
Let's give them a clap.
Thank
Let's
you,
give our
guys.
panel a clap. You guys did amazing.